Hello, everyone. I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. We're excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in healthcare IT. And today's special guest is Scott Stuewe. He's president and CEO at DirectTrust. Welcome, Scott.
It's great to be here, John. Thanks very much for having us.
Yeah, and I love the background. I think we're all jealous of your background right now, and it looks real. It's not even, that's awesome. But anyway, besides the fact that we all want you to play your guitar, tell us a little bit about DirectTrust and what DirectTrust does in healthcare.
Sure, John. So our core goal is to improve healthcare for individuals and populations by instilling trust in healthcare information exchange. So the flow of healthcare data is essential. If data needs to flow, that flow requires the trust of the participants. And so that's kind of our core elements. In terms of what we are organizationally, we're sort of four different things. We're a membership organization and a convener for those neutral conversations. We're a nonprofit trade association, just in terms of how we're organized. And recently we've become a standards development organization as well. And that kind of goes to the point of what most folks know us for, which is the direct secure messaging standard, or the direct standard. The direct standard is in fact a core piece of what it is we're known for. That's the ability to exchange healthcare information virtually across the United States between provider organizations. That network is another key component. We are that network. But the trust part, the second half of our name, is maybe what people need to know most about us. It's the aspect that we accredit our participants, and we're a trust framework in that regard.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting to talk about a trust framework. It's a cool concept, but I think a lot of people probably wonder, what does that mean?
Yeah, so let me give you kind of two ways to think about it. First, a trust framework really establishes and maintains the necessary rules that establish trust. So we convene a community to establish consensus around how that is done. So trust establishes the kind of reliability that is required for exchange through standards and policies. Those standards and policies are really that's the work we do. And that then establishes the comfort people have around exchanging data or doing whatever they're going to do. The cornerstone of that trust is identity. Now, that's a kind of an abstract way of thinking about this, but let's talk about it in a way that people will understand. So trust on the internet is an essential element. So the internet transactions always require trust. So the best example everybody understands is Visa and MasterCard. Visa and MasterCard are each separate trust frameworks that actually trust each other, which allows for you to go anywhere in the world and carry your card, and then you're able to, transact with your bank wherever the bank is. Now, the reason that works is because of the rules and the standards that both Visa and MasterCard, and by the way, their adherents, their banks, the banks. So when you think about DirectTrust, don't think of us as a bank, think of us as Visa. Okay, so that's the first thing, is we're the trust framework, not the participants. So the participants are our community. Now, there's another really kind of key example, which is the core internet example, which is ICANN. Now, people don't even know what ICANN is, but
I do. I'm a tech guy, but
you're
go ahead.
Outlier, John. Let's clear that up. But
that's fair.
So domain names in the world, everybody understands what a domain name is. Like, I go to google.com, how can I be sure it's google.com? How can I be sure there isn't another google.com or another directtrust.com, or that directtrust.com isn't masquerading as google.com? Well, I can't make sure that can't happen. It's standards and it's rules, and it's enforcing those rules. And that's what a trust framework does. Those trust communities that establish the rules and actually manage them and even enforce them if need be, that's what a trust framework does.
Yeah, and it's a great example of both the Visa and the ICANN domain example. And I think what's most interesting about it is you've done such a good job of creating that trust that literally billions of messages have been sent in this trust framework. So I think that's a powerful message, because without that trust, those messages don't happen. So that's great. Well, you have some exciting news to share that you haven't shared anywhere else. So I love that from a healthcare IT Today perspective. So tell us, what's your news to share today?
This is really exciting stuff. So we are in the process of incorporating the assets of another trust, healthcare-based trust framework. That organization is called Safe Identity. And this positions us to provide new services and serve new constituencies that we've never had an opportunity to do, not just because of the things that Safe Identity already does, but the things that when you put DirectTrust and Safe Identity together, what you get. So a little bit about Safe Identity, just so that you know who they are. We talked about DirectTrust already, but Safe Identity also began its life as a nonprofit in the early 2000s. Their focus is really on authentication, and that's for securely signing documents. That was their first goal. An obligation, something that the FDA promoted, that's called 21 CFR Part 11 for the people who just
All the pharmacy nerds out there, yeah.
Nerds out there who like to know what the governmental regulations are. But that is that's the standard that supports the notion of submitting documents securely to the FDA. So that's how they were born. Their membership is made up of mostly pharmaceutical companies that do this job of connecting to federal agencies. So the safe credentials that are offered by these certified organizations, safe issuers, they're certificate authorities in the parlance of the language of our business, but
sure.
We have certificate authorities in our community, they have certificate authorities in theirs, but they're the issuers of those credentials. Think of them like the driver's license bureau that gives you a credential that you can use that then can be validated against that external source. So that's what these credentials are about. They can be obtained from any of those safe issuers, and their policies have been audited and certified by the trust framework, SAFE. So what this allows for is this securely submitting documents to the FDA, but also for things like e-prescribing for controlled substances, the signing of documents, and frankly, you can use it for virtually anything that you want to just assign, ownership to or your identity to. So the two trust frameworks are the same, but they're different. Here's how they're the same. So both are trust frameworks that use public key infrastructure. Public key infrastructure uses the digital certificates that frankly run the internet. I mean, the internet is, you and I have probably 10 certificates supporting this very activity right now. Certificates are behind everything that happens on the internet and everything that happens on computers. So we're both public key infrastructure based organizations. We both provide security and identity assurance for these electronic communications. The different focus that we have is that we're focused in the health information exchange space, and they're really about authentication for signing documents and logging into systems and physical access to buildings and such. So those are two different ways of using a PKI framework. And so bringing these two together, obviously people immediately might think of some opportunities.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think identity is so important in interoperability. So I think, a lot of people can see some opportunities there. But what opportunities do you see as the combined entity of DirectTrust and Safe Identity?
Yeah, well, so when you think about our constituencies, between the pharmaceutical companies, just who we have today, the pharmaceutical companies and the provider organizations and the EHR companies. Okay, so if that's kind of who you're connecting from the get-go, what can you do? Well, one of the really interesting things that you could solve for is vaccine credentials, which right now, by the way, are a bit of a hodgepodge. I mean, there's actually some really good standards work that's been done in this space. And I'm not to denigrate anything they've done in the Vaccine Credential Initiative. This is all really good work. What's missing is a trust framework to tell you where this stuff came from. And that in fact, this is in fact a valid document. There isn't anything in the model that they proposed so far that allows for these documents to be digitally signed. And there's nothing that would keep those documents from being digitally signed, and at least to know where they came from, what organization vouches for them. Even if you couldn't actually digitally sign the document, you could at least know that it came from this place, which is actually hugely important. So vaccine credentials. There's also this, there's a Drug Supply Chain Security Act, which requires for basically tracking and tracing of medications from their point of origin to their point of use. And that, when you think about all the origins and all the uses, think of how many places this represents. Very complicated, but when you think about where those communities intersect, they intersect at DirectTrust and SAFE being in one organization. So when you think about the pharmaceutical companies being the, fundamentally the sources of that data, and then a lot of their uses are clinical pharmacies, like clinical pharmacies in the hospital. That's actually a huge piece of the supply chain that is very, very poorly connected to the overall supply chain model. So that's going to be very interesting to see if we can kind of build a trust framework around that. The other place that's really interesting, and this is in the news all the time, actually supply chain is as well. I mean, I'm probably aware of Biden's focus on supply chain. Everybody's aware of how challenging this exercise is, but medical devices, which are computers in their own right? So each medical device that is deployed in a healthcare setting, most of them actually only want to talk inside the healthcare setting and not inside the enterprise, if you will. But since they're wireless devices, it doesn't matter if they're thinking of them as enterprise devices. It's like you might as well have them in the parking lot. Like they're on the web, right? They're on the internet because they're wireless. So for you to support these things, even if they're in the enterprise, as a mechanism that you want to very, very tightly control, you want to encrypt the communication very well, and you want to know who belongs on your network and who doesn't. That's, I think, a really key element. So medical devices are an area where we believe this partnership makes sense. Also, consumer credentials. So we've had a conversation that's lasted over a year with the Caring Alliance and with a series of trust frameworks getting together to say, well, how can our credentials be trusted by each other? So in other words, if an identity provider, organization like say ID.me, which is identity provider that actually operates in a trust framework of sorts in the Cantera realm, if they want to have their credentials trusted by someone else, like say for instance in the care quality realm where we operate those certificates and we provide those capabilities, we could make that connection and make it easy. So in order to make those kinds of consumer credentials scale, you need to first of all imagine that there probably won't be just one trust framework. There certainly won't be just one identity provider.
Certainly.
And they're because there are millions and millions and millions of consumers. So so that I think is going to be very interesting. The thing we're trying to solve for there is hyperportalosis. You may have heard of this.
I've seen that disease. Yes.
So the way that consumer credentials are being offered, you're probably aware of the information blocking rule that makes it a requirement for EHRs and their clients to offer access to patients with an app of their choosing. Well, that exercise is great as far as it goes. Now, the challenge is you have to have a portal credential for each one of the portals. So if you're somebody like me who's been to 4 or 5 doctors, I got four or five portals. Now, if you're a cancer patient, you may have 23 portals. This is something that's very, very difficult for folks to manage. And so having a credential that would be reusable and portable and nonetheless reliable enough that the data holders will be comfortable with it. That's the key. That's what we're trying to get to, is a reliable enough credential that it would be portable and reusable at multiple portals instead of having to manage separate credentials for each portal, separate username and passwords. It's a nutty circumstance. If you've tried to do that, it's a mess.
I was going to say, you're getting the patients listening excited about this because, they all suffer through it. But I mean, I think it is interesting. What kind of organizations might be interested in the joint work that you're doing? I'd be interested also, like how interesting is this to DirectTrust members? But it sounds like there's going to be a lot of other people that are interested as well.
Well, there are, and I think that the first step is, interest for the existing communities, both communities. So we don't have anywhere near all of the users of safe credentials on the safe identity side. We just have a relatively small number of pharmaceutical companies who participate in governance, and same as it is on the DirectTrust side. So in Direct, we have, a set of folks who participate. You don't technically have to be a DirectTrust member to use direct secure messaging. And so, and that's the same is true for a safe credential. So what we want to do is we want to create the excitement around the conversations we're having to bring more people to the discussion. So that's the pharmaceutical companies, the issuers, that is those certificate authorities, the provider organizations that today participate at some level with Direct. I mean, DirectTrust has about 100 members, or a little more than 100 members, actually 105 or 110, I think, with the addition of our friends from SAFE. But once you put the two things together, here's where things kind of get interesting. The organizations that start having interest are organizations like clinical research organizations, where the opportunity for pharmaceutical companies to be engaging and communicating successfully and securely with providers, in the process of doing a clinical trial, for example. So now the other thing is, we talked about identity providers. Identity providers today are not generally accredited to be a part of a trust framework. We would like to change that. We would like to bring the identity providers into the discussion and provide a mechanism to put an accreditation on them that allows them to exchange in this framework and to use a credential that is usable not just across our framework, but across other frameworks that we might cross-certify with, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's another one. The medical device manufacturers, we've had conversations with organizations that believe in this trusted medical device challenge and how to resolve it. And so we believe that medical device manufacturers are going to be interested in being a part of this conversation as we're developing, the policies and the standards that would make this stuff really work. I think they'll want to be a part of it. Likewise, potentially clinical laboratories that are, again, a part of that sort of triad of organizations that communicate in the vaccine world, right? So the testing, the vaccinations, and the information that patients want. This stuff is, that's the complexity of this problem. And it's the number of organizations that want to connect are just immense. So then there's also this, the opportunities provider organizations are going to see that are beyond the scope of what it is they do today. Now, the thing that I believe that's interesting is to watch is the costs associated with having strong credentials in the healthcare space. So strong credentials are common at the FDA. They're common at, like if you're at Boeing, you use a card that gets you into the place, like aerospace, nuclear facilities.
Definitely.
They all treat their data like that because it's very highly sensitive. Well, in the circumstance we're in today, our healthcare organization is going to start realizing they need strong credentials for their systems because they're exposed to these ransomware attacks. And so the most important thing for them is, how do I just make absolutely certain nobody can get in my system except those who I've absolutely vetted and I know who they are, and here is their credential, it's immutable. So that, I think, is a strong credential, is something that provider organizations may be interested in the future.
Yeah, I think credentials are so important from a security perspective, as you highlight, but I also love the idea of the most interesting areas of healthcare is when you combine data across different sources, whether it's the lab data with the vaccination data or whatever it might be. That's where the magic happens. But if we can't do that in a trusted way, then it's useless. So I think that's exciting areas. What other benefits do you see, like healthcare? What could we expect from this announcement, and as a result of this news? I think you talked about one. Obviously, if we can get some identity and help improve hyperproteolysis, right? Like that would be awesome. What other benefits do you see for healthcare?
Well, I think that what I want to just kind of reiterate is that, frankly, if you're going to have secure, reliable data flow, you need to have trust. Okay, so this is the first element, and that is what is required to advance health. Data is what makes health easier to manage. In the absence of the data, providers are hamstrung. They end up running all the same tests over again. This is the basic thing we've been trying to solve for in interoperability, since I've been involved in healthcare. Like getting it all to one place, first kind of solving it in the enterprise space was interesting, but then, providers, or patients go outside of this provider organization. They got to have their data, assembled. So getting the data to flow depends on that trust between those organizations. Protecting against cyber threats, which is actually, what about I was reading today, think of the risk associated with losing a medical device on a network. It's just, if it drops out, what are the risks? Like you got to disconnect it from the network because it's connected to this, this virus infected, host. Got to get it off of there so that it doesn't get virus infected itself. And yet, what is the risk of doing that? So the resilience of our systems is essential for good health. We depend so much on diagnostic devices, which are fundamentally computers in their own right. And so if we don't start treating them like part of the ecosystem, and most healthcare organizations are absolutely doing that. But I think having a very, very high assurance understanding of which devices belong on the network, which organizations want to connect with whom, this is what makes healthcare safe. Safe healthcare is delivered only if you have reliable access to all the data you need and know that it comes from a source you can trust. These are the key elements.
Yeah, powerful. So if an organization wants to learn more or maybe get involved, how might they do that?
Well, certainly visit our website, directtrust.org. There's a contact form out there which you could use to, enter your contact information. We'll get back to you. Now, we also are going to have on this specific subject of the DirectTrust incorporation of SAFE's assets, we're going to have a late September event on the September the 29th. It's going to be recorded if you can't make it. So that I think would be a good way for you to get a good sense of this. We'll do this a full story and have folks from the SAFE community to describe their part in it. So also follow us on social media. That's probably the best way to stay most up to date. Our team does a great job, and we thank you for your help, John, in helping to propel our stories as they come out. But I think that's where this stuff usually hits first. Like when anything that happens hits social media before it can hit our website.
You're an adaptive organization. That's what that means. So that's great. And I love to promote anything that pushes forward interoperability in a trusted way. So, it's always a pleasure working with you, Scott. Congratulations on the announcement of bringing Safe Identity into the fold. And thanks for sharing some insights and perspectives. And thanks everyone for watching. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, John.